Go to Sunday school, and we'll return for the end of communion, or the beginning of communion. Our scripture reading today comes from the Gospel of Matthew, chapter 14, verses 13 through 21. Listen now for a word from God. Now when Jesus heard this, he withdrew from there in a boat to a deserted place by himself. When the crowds heard it, they followed him on foot from the towns. When he went ashore, he saw a great crowd, and he had compassion for them and cured their sick. When it was the evening, the disciples came to him and said, "This is a deserted place, and the hour is now late. Send the crowds away so that they may go into the villages and buy food for themselves." Jesus said to them, "They need not go away. You give them something to eat." They replied, "We have nothing here but 5 loaves and 2 fish." And he said, "Bring them here to me." Then he ordered the crowds to sit down on the grass. Taking the 5 loaves and 2 fish, he looked up to heaven, blessed and broke the loaves and gave them to the disciples. And the disciples gave them to the crowds. And all ate and were filled. And they took up what was left over of the broken pieces, 12 baskets full. And those who ate were about 5,000 men, besides women and children. At this point in the Gospel of Matthew, Jesus' ministry has taken off. People from all over the countryside are coming to hear him speak because he has good news to share. Today we have youth who went on the Puerto Rico mission trip, and they have stories to share of the good and hard work that they did.
Hi, I'm Emily. During our time in Puerto Rico, I was in the group that was working on a shed and temporary house for a man named Rafael. I worked on Rafael's tool shed, and we nailed in siding and worked on framing for the majority of the week. The majority of us had very little carpentry experience going into this, so we didn't really know what to expect. Thankfully, the men from the group from St. Louis were more than willing to give us a guiding hand and teach us what to do. I had very little, well, let's be real, no carpentry experience before this, and I couldn't hammer a nail into a piece of wood to save my life. This proved to be a challenge given that the majority of our task was to hammer siding into the framing. Raphael was an experienced handyman himself and spent his days sitting outside on a brick watching the process, and it was no surprise that he was so interested and excited. When a few of us walked around the property, we realized that all the side walls of the house were gone. All he had was the interior walls and the roof, which was made mostly of tarps. So we worked, and he watched and occasionally dozed off while he was watching us, but made sure to make his presence known. And even when the pouring rain came, he stood right inside his house and watched. He was sure to give us tips if our work wasn't up to his standard, and it was really fun for me and some of the other Spanish speakers to talk to him in Spanish and work on our Spanish skills. But there was one phrase that we both struggled to translate for a bit. Grace was working on hammering in nails into the siding, and Rafael was watching. And he smiled at us and said, "Un pájaro me recorrió antes que martillas ese clavo." And we both couldn't translate it at first, so we went and got our guide and asked him to help us. It turned out that Rafael was informing us that a bird would come and pick him up and fly him away before we hammered in that nail. We all, including Raphael, laughed and continued working on our hammering. It was then when it really hit me that Raphael was watching us because this was his future and his home. And each week a new group came in, but he was sure to help us all feel welcome and like he really cared. And as we said our goodbyes in English or Spanish, there were tears in Raphael's eyes, and it put it all in perspective. Our work had meaning to both us and Raphael, and we had made a huge difference in his life.
Okay, I'm just going to get straight to the point. Puerto Rico was amazing. It was so special to me, and I got to witness new surroundings, a new atmosphere, new people, and a completely new environment. One of the best but saddest memories that I had was the very first time we were at the worksite. We pulled up in our super cool school bus with lights and blasting music, and I looked around, and what I saw was just utterly horrible. There were houses that had been half torn apart with entire walls missing. There were roofs made out of just plain sheets of metal, and I soon realized that we had a lot of work to do. So in the back of my mind, I said, let's go. We're going to make the most of this trip and get as much done as possible. From then on, every day we worked hard at whatever we did. My group was consistently working as hard as we could on building a temporary home for this one amazing person named Raphael. Throughout this, we came so very close to finishing his house, but we only had 2 drills at our work site, so there was only so much for everyone to do. And I really hope that the next group coming in finished it. My favorite part of the entire trip was just getting to know all the other youth from our church and the other churches. There was one group from Ohio and another from St. Louis. But the most important part to me was the very special bonds that we formed with the rest of our youth from our church. There were a couple of nights in particular the last 2, where we all went outside and we all sat there looking up at the stars in the night sky. And some of these moments were in silence, whereas others that we went over the highs and lows of our day, and then there was others where we would sing Country Roads, Sanctuary, and Wagon Wheel, or other songs like that. And I saw God many times throughout this trip. And then one time was the first day we went to the beach. As soon as we walked in, a bunch of heads turned toward us because we were new and such a big group. When we started towards the water, a lot of the Puerto Ricans moved away and let us be. But some of the little kids stayed around us and watched what we were doing. My brother and I brought a frisbee down from our compound where we were staying, and we were just throwing the frisbee and just messing around with it. And I soon noticed that one of the younger kids that was there in the water started kind of inching his way towards us. And I motioned toward him, sort of asking, hey, yo, want the disc, buddy? And at first, he shrunk back into his parents. But then by the third time, he nodded his head, and I threw the frisbee to him. And then soon, the younger boy got some of his friends to come over as well, and all of them were throwing with us, which was super awesome. And then once the day grew on, we got to know all the little kids so much better. And eventually, Justin, Matt, and Stefan decided that some chicken fights were in order. So they put the younger kids onto their shoulders, and we just had a few chicken fights. And the looks on those kids' faces could have only been described by pure joy. We all were having so much fun together, and it was so amazing. And then the very interesting friendship that we all formed with those little kids was where I saw God. It showed me that even with our differences, we are all the same. Thank you.
Hi, I'm Axl. I love this trip. I learned so much, and when we made new friends from other states and in Dorado. We all worked together, and everyone got along really, really well. So for the first day, we were all tourists. We saw that some of the taller buildings had some missing windows and other damage from the Hurricane Maria. But you didn't come here for me to tell you on how being a tourist was. You came here to have me tell you about what it was like on the work site. We worked on many different houses, but most of the time, I was helping with a man named Raphael. There was also another man who had so much trash and scrap metal in his yard from the hurricane that he couldn't clear it out himself. That took us half a day to clean up. Raphael's house was mostly worked on by our church group and groups volunteers from St. Louis. We enjoyed putting in flooring for the temporary house for Raphael. We also worked on his shed, which I loved because I got to use a hammer. We put up boards as a shed wall and nailed it all in. We finished most of the shed except putting in the windows. We really wanted to finish that. One of the best parts was lunchtime when we got a break from being in the heat and sun all day. We got to go eat and play a little bit of basketball under a covered court. We got people from all the groups, Boulder, St. Louis, Ohio, and people who actually were from the Hunger Corps as well. to play with us, which was awesome. The cook who brought us lunch had 2 kids, Kiko and Jarek. They were really nice, and they just walked up to us and started playing ball with us one day. They were funny, and every time we saw them, we would just shout out their names and wave and laugh with them. Kiko and Jarek never spoke very little English, but we had fun with them, even though they didn't know what we were saying, and we couldn't understand them either. I learned that you don't need to speak the same language to connect and have a lot of fun with people. When it was the final work day, when we were about to leave, we all said our goodbyes to everyone in Puerto Rico. We all piled into the bus, and then we looked back and saw Raphael crying. I think from a combination of happiness that is shed being built and the sadness of our leaving. At this moment on the trip, I saw God the most, because of what we did for Raphael and what us helping him rebuild his house meant to him, and how good it felt for us to help. It was amazing to see how happy he was. I feel like I grew closer to the other kids and the grown-ups on this trip through helping a lot of people together. Thank you all for helping us go on this trip.
Hi, I'm Maggie Wilkerson.
I'm Maya, and me and Maggie are going to tell you a story about a person who really impacted our trip. So the story begins on the first day of our work. We also were in the same group as Emily and Axl working on Raphael's house. So we were taking a break one day underneath this big tree next to Raphael's house. And this lady walks up, and she's holding this big stick with a hook on the end. And we're like, what is she doing? And she just walks up to us and starts hitting the tree with the stick. And we're like, what is she doing? And then fruit starts falling from the tree. And we start realizing that that's what she uses to pick the fruit from the tree. So she hands us this fruit and starts saying, agua, agua, and rushes us over to wash the fruits. And so then we're like, ¿qué es esto? What is this? And she says that the fruit is called a pumarosa. And we decided that it was a mix between like an apple and a pear, I guess, sort of. And so we continued to see this woman walking around the neighborhood, but no one really knew where she came from or like who she was. But she was very involved in all the projects that we had. And she would help us on our work whenever she ended up not even living there in the first place. So me and Maggie were very intrigued by this woman, and we decided to go make friends with her. And so we go up, and in my very little Spanish that I speak, asked her her name, and her name was Lily. And so we continued to bond over the trip with this woman named Lily, and you're part of the story now.
So I remember one day very vividly. Maya and I had been working on Raphael's house, and we decided to take a little break at the park across from where we were working. It had the little rocking horses that have the spring and then it can go back and forth. It had those, and then it had 2 swings. And this woman named Lily, she came and she joined us. She got on the horse and started rocking back and forth. She spoke very little English, but was so kind and so sweet. Like Maya said, she got us pumarosa, she shoveled cement, she carried the cement. She didn't even live in this community, but she was such a big part of it. But we were rocking on these little horses, and she comes in. So I'm sitting on one that's right here, and there's one right across. And she comes and sits on it and starts going back and forth, making horse noises. Just, neigh, neigh. So Camille goes to take a picture, who isn't up here, but she was there. Camille goes to take a picture of her, and she goes, and she starts fixing her hair. She takes her hat off, she's like, and then she gets ready, and she puts on this huge smile, which I remember, it's so bright in my head. It's such a pure picture, and it was just the most genuine smile I've ever seen a human make. So the picture was taken, and Maya decides to go swing. Lily then gets up and goes onto the swing. She's just loving this playground. She speaks very little English, like very little. And so she gets on the swing, and she's just swinging back and forth. Whee! Whee! And this woman, who had been such an inspiration to Maya and I throughout this whole trip, is here, looking like a child, sounding like a child. And I won't ever forget that.
Hi, I'm Stefan. Some of the most important pictures on my phone are of people I only knew for a short time. Barbara and Rafael from Puerto Rico. All people we met in a city in Puerto Rico almost completely destroyed by Hurricane Maria. As you all know, I was there last summer to help rebuild some homes. Friendship with those I met there came easy because there wasn't much that cluttered the space between us. No iPhones, no social media, none of the excess and inertia that often animates the social life in my town back home. It was here, in the comfort of these budding friendships, that I learned some things about the world and my place in it. My perspective of poverty was warped compared to seeing it in real life. What I learned from Barbara and Rafael is that poverty results in a loss of control. As people lose resources, or in the case of Puerto Rico, where people lost everything, they lose options that allow them to manage and control their circumstances. The difference between me and them is not just monetary, such as the value placed on the new tile floors that we installed in Barbara's new home, but rather about opportunity and the ability to act on our aspirations, to get better at something that really matters to us, to direct our own lives. What I learned is that poverty isn't just about the absence of resources. It is a far more complex set of psychological, emotional, and institutional issues. Since then, I've developed a much more sophisticated appreciation for the importance of my blessings and how they can help me reach my goals. I know that I can, with the proper education, be in a position to help address some of the issues created by poverty and injustice. Although we did help out massively with the construction of several homes in Puerto Rico, I know that with the right resources, the youth and I can make a much bigger change in the world. Hope, perseverance, and self-reliance are not just characteristics I came to embrace as the result of the mission trip we went on, but have become fundamental principles upon which to guide my education and to build my life. Thank you.
On this trip, I saw God through these youth and the work that they put in that week to better the life of other people. I cannot express with words how incredibly proud I am of every single one of them that went on this trip. Oftentimes, the good work that we do is some of the hardest work that we will do. And the hard work that they did was some of the best work. Thanks be to God. Amen.